Good evening and welcome. I'm Alan
Just
Bornstein. You normally see me presenting matters pertaining to the Holocaust, so this is a very rare privilege for me to do something more cheerful and chirpy. The running order of the evening will be that I have the privilege of casting away, only in theory, Rabbi Zobin, and then Viv Levy will cast away Rosie Grozinski, and finally Ayala Mora Prager will cast away John Denneman. Before I make the inevitable superfluous introduction of Rabbi Zobin, which I will do, I want to take the opportunity at the commencement of the evening, as opposed to at the end of the evening, when votes of thanks are normally a sign for everyone to leave a Zoom meeting, to especially thank Simon Balsam, who has done the technology for this evening, many of the Zoom events of the shul for the past 3 months, and has also worked tirelessly together with Jonathan Marriott on masterminding the reopening of Ner Yisrael. So I think it is appropriate and apposite to thank Simon at the beginning of this evening. Whilst undertaking votes of thanks, I will also thank Dr. Veronique Berman for all her hard work and for arranging this evening. Our castaway, as I said, needs no introduction, but nonetheless I will do so. Rabbi Eliezer Zobin was born in 1975 in Golders Green and was one of 5 children. He learned in yeshivas for 17 years and received samicha in Be'er Yaakov, a very prestigious yeshiva kollel in Israel. He has a MA in Jewish education from London University, is the principal of the Independent Jewish Day School and of Emmanuel and Rosh Beistin Medrash, forgive me, of the London School of Jewish Studies. He joined Ner Yisrael as Associate Rav in 2014 and succeeded Rabbi Kimchi, the founding Rav, in March 2019. That's enough from me. Rabbi Zobin, welcome. Let's start, as is the inevitable format in Desert Island Disc, and telling us a little bit about your parents and your grandparents, who you were privileged to all know.
Thank you very much, Alan, and thank you for that warm welcome and introduction. I must confess to slight trepidation being interviewed by you, but I hope this all goes well. So yes, I grew up in, as you said, in Golders Green. I was a Menorah Primary Hasmo boy. My parents come from quite different backgrounds. On my father's family, we are firmly East European and actually Litvaks, Lithuanians. My great-grandparents came over in the early 1900s and went quite a traditional Jewish route via the East End, and then moved out to the suburbs. On my father's side, as I said, they came from East Europe, from Lithuania, from Kovna, and that region. On my father's grandfather came over in 1906 in the quite a large wave of Jewish immigration. The story was he was a second son, and his older brother had been conscripted into the Russian army. His older brother was not quite as strong a person as he was, and he volunteered and effectively went into the Russian army instead of his older brother. He finished his term of service, and then in 1906, it was now his turn as the second brother to be called up. 1906 was the Russo-Japanese War, and lots of Jews were called up to serve in the Russian army. At that point, he had had enough and ran off to England. We actually have a little bit of a Grudzinski connection also in that side of the family. I know Rosie isn't the one interviewing me here, but my great-grandfather worked for the Grudzinski family. He used to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and deliver warm, steaming hot bread from the Grudzinski bakery around the streets of East London and Stamford Hill. And ever since then, us Zobins have hated getting up early in the morning. So Rosie, we blame the Grudzinskis for that. So that's on my father's side. On my mother's side, we are Yekkers. I grew up in Monks, and we're very proud of our Yekkish ancestry. They were from Frankfurt, and the Frankfurt community was a very proud and important community, a very central Jewish community. My great-great-grandfather was one of the 11 signatories to the document, the very famous invitation to Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch to move to Frankfurt. So these were staunch Hirschians, And if I have time, I can tell you a little bit more about their relationship with Rav Hirsch and that school of thought, that philosophy. But my grandmother, who I was very close to, and when I speak about the song I've chosen, I'll speak a little bit more about her, really felt her whole life that she was a product of the Hirschian system, Torim Derech Eretz, and the Frankfurt school of thought and the Frankfurt community. There was something very central to us growing up, and her pride in that Masorah and in that tradition.
And it's quite rare, was quite rare, at least pre-war, for Yekkes to marry Eastern Europeans. Was that ever an issue with all your grandparents?
So on my grandparents' side, the Yekka married the Yekka, and an East European married an East European. My parents' generation, it was where they married an East European descent, married a Yekkish descent. That was after quite a while after the Second World War. My parents would want me to clarify. And no, I grew up in a home that was blessed with an incredible marriage. My parents are absolute role models of incredible parenting and incredible love and esteem and respect for each other. I hope they're listening, because they should know how much the home I grew up in means to us and to all our siblings. We really grew up in a home of a role model of warmth, of achnosas orchim. Every meal there was extra places laid. There were guests there. Very often these guests were not easy people. These were difficult people. My mother's a proud and fastidious housewife and housekeeper, and very often these guests were not always the easiest guests to have in accordance with the home she would have naturally wanted, and yet they were always more than welcome and were regulars at our table. And the example they set of warmth and love of Torah and mitzvahs remains an inspiration to me to this day. My mother's a teacher. I come from a family of teachers. We're all teachers. My brother's a teacher. My sister's a teacher. My aunt is a teacher. My uncle is a teacher. My mother is a teacher. And she really is a wonderful teacher. My father worked his whole career in the city. He was a stockbroker. He joined that world when it was quite unusual for frum Jews really to be in the city. And he stood out for his honesty at his retirement. One of his colleagues spoke about him as the most honest person he had ever met. And these are values really very deeply embedded in us through my wonderful parents and the example they showed us. You also asked about my siblings, and maybe I'll take this as a chance to mention, you said we were one of 5. Many of you will know 3 of my siblings, but there was a 4th, who was my sister, Chana Shifra, who was born very severely disabled, very severely Down syndrome. She passed away when I was 11. We were very, very close as a family. And in those days, Kisharon was very much in its infancy. It was not something taken for granted that one would keep at home a Down syndrome child, especially one who was as unwell as she was. Kisharon was not able in those days really equipped to look after her. And again, my parents were truly inspirational and incredible in raising her as part of our family. And she was very precious to us. She was very dear to us. We always felt privileged to have her as a sibling. And it's an interesting thing. Many years later, my mother said to me that she worried at the time as we were growing up that we would feel starved of time, and because the weight of a sibling who is unwell takes a lot of family attention away, and she worried about it. But I can honestly say, growing up, none of us ever felt that. And I've since spoken to my siblings. None of us ever felt that. We only felt lucky and blessed to have such a wonderful sister. And really admiration, we understood from a very young age, admiration of both our parents who cared for her at home so lovingly. So I hope, again, I'm so delighted and honoured to have the floor here to be able to share those feelings about my parents.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Zobin. Forgive me for asking this, but did the fact that, albeit all of us who incurred tragedies would prefer that things had been different, but did the fact that you and your parents and your siblings suffered this tragedy give you an insight in your rabbinic role when you very often have to deal with people who are either, Rahman al-Islam, God forbid, about to be bereaved or literally bereaved within minutes, hours, and days? Did that give you a particular insight?
I'm more comfortable talking about my parents than I am about myself in this context. I guess the answer is yes. I guess the answer is yes. Definitely, these were experiences that we thought about and that left an impact on me, and I think all of us. And having shared experiences, of course. I will say, because maybe it should be said, the reality of life is that we all go through difficult experiences and we all suffer losses. And at the time, these losses are deeply painful and obviously so. But with time and with healing, one is able to draw a lot of richness out of it. And in no way is that a lack of a sense of loss. Of course, one always misses the person one's lost. Of course, one would always want things to have been different. But equally, one sees and learns that there are many paths in life, and one didn't choose the path of bereavement, but having gone through it, one draws growth and richness from that deep distress and difficulty also.
Thank you very much. Rabbi Zobin, I think we've got a good time as any for us to tell us your first record and why you chose it.
Yeah, so I chose this record in honor of my grandmother, my mother's mother. It's Vivaldi's Four Seasons. I'm not going to speak too much about the piece of music itself, other than to say it tells a story, as all music does. It tells the story of the four seasons, of spring, summer, autumn, and winter, in that order. And I chose it because it's the first piece of classic music I remember. My grandmother took me. I don't remember actually if anyone else went with us, whether it was just my grandmother and I or some of the other siblings or cousins, but she took me to hear Vivaldi's Four Seasons. And I always associate this piece, therefore, with her. As I said, she was really from the nobility of Frankfurt, a wonderful lady, sorely missed, a lady of high education. In Frankfurt, they learnt both Chol and Kodesh to a remarkably high degree. She was an inspiration, someone who went through arrived on the shores of England in the 1930s, as did so many others, as a refugee, and built a life out of that. Another shared experience which has a Ner connection is that we used to go together to hear the late Rabbi Isaac Bernstein in Ner, my grandmother and I, and to have an experience of a grandson and a grandmother sitting together learning Torah is really speaks volumes about Ner and Rabbi Bernstein, that he could capture such a wide market, and anyone who remembers him knows that he was able to do so. But this piece of music, as I said, is really dedicated in her memory, and it's a music that I always associate with her. It's the first piece of classic music that I remember hearing in concert, and reminds me of that shared experience with her.
Thank you. I think the song has finished. Thank you very much for that song. I think interestingly, you mentioned a Ner connection to your late grandmother. I recall Felix Storm saying that she took him to school on his very first day in England. So she sounds a very special lady, and I'm pleased you have fond memories of her and all your grandparents. Let's turn, if I may, to you personally. You mentioned that you trod the well-trodden path of Menorah Primary School, Hasmonean Grammar School. At Hasmonean, you famously, and this is true, I have on good authority, and you will, I hope, forgive me for mentioning this, excelled academically to the extent that you topped the A-level charts in economics, and then went to learn in various yeshivas. So can I first of all ask you, when I assume that you were not one of the pupils that used to trouble the various disciplinarians in charge at Hasmonean. Is that a fair comment? Is that a fair
So I was not
assumption?
one of the students who
Troubled the disciplinarians at Hasmonean.
Um, well, first of all, you've evidently done your research well. I'm not quite sure what your sources are for some of that information. I didn't know it was known about particularly. I think it did get down to Zobin, where's your school tie? I think that was the extent of my disciplinary issues. That's a fair point.
And when you left to go to yeshiva, did you envisage the 17-year stay, or did you envisage perhaps joining your father in the city, or leaving somewhat earlier to undertake your destiny as a teacher, as you were and indeed are?
So I definitely did not envisage that many years in Israel. The plan was a shorter time in yeshiva, and I was not planning a career in teaching either. I was and remain fascinated by economics, and I still follow the markets and the charts as a hobby. I grew up in a home where my father has an enduring love of Torah, but also an enduring love of economics, and that was something that I enjoyed. But I became drawn into the love of learning and of Torah in Israel. In fact, the next two songs that I've chosen are both connected with my yeshiva experiences. As you say, I went to Israel and learnt first under Reb Tzvi Kushelevsky, who many of you will know, and then went to Be'er Yaakov to learn under Moshe Shmuel Shapiro. And both had a big impact on me. But in particular, Moshe Shmuel Shapiro was someone who I saw and continue to see as really an angel of a human being. He was a malach in my eyes. He was a man of exceptional dignity, incredible warmth. When one spoke to him, one felt waves of love really emerging from him. He had this yeshiva Be'er Yaakov in the village of Be'er Yaakov. And Be'er Yaakov was a little village in the Ramallah Lod region of the country. It's now been swallowed up to my disappointment by the conurbation that Ramallah has become. I was in Israel a couple of years ago and decided to visit, and the orange groves I remember and the fields are all now high-rise buildings. But he chose to found this yeshiva in this little town, in this little village. And he was, to me, someone who conveyed the transmission of Torah into of the East European Torah into the next world. But I am getting ahead of myself because I think he's associated with the third piece of music that I will be talking about. So I'll step back a little and talk about him a little later.
So let me just try to chart you went to Reb Tzvi Kushelevsky's, you went to Be'er Yaakov, and you were close to Reb Moshe Shmuel Shapiro. I'm going to ask you, when in your sort of day-to-day life, as you paskin shilas, do you very often think, what would Reb Moshe Shapiro have, how would Reb Moshe Shapiro have dealt with it? Is he a part of your day-to-day thoughts?
Okay, so maybe we should step back a little because, as I said, he's associated with the third piece of music. In between these two, I spent a short amount of time in Mir, and the second piece of music is associated, is connected with my time in Mir. I was not there a long time. It was too big for me, the yeshiva. It didn't suit my needs and my personality and what I was looking for. But in that time, I had the privilege of having a connection with a number of people, which I'll just mention here at this point. I had the very beautiful opportunity to draw close to Reb Rafael Shmulevitz, the son of Reb Chaim Shmulevitz, who was actually Rabbi Kimchi's, one of Rabbi Kimchi's mentors. And that to me was a vision of a great man. I also got to know through a series of interesting events Rav Elyashiv. And the background to this is that Mir has a very slow davening. Now, those of you who know me know that by nature I'm not a slow davener, and I used to find Mir too slow. So I looked around for somewhere else to daven, and I found a small shul near the Mir, which literally used to get 14 people, 15 people on a Shabbos morning, and Rav Elyashiv was the Rav there, and there was no one there. It was just this little empty shul, and I started davening there. I used to daven there on Shabbos. I used to daven there on Yomim Noraim. And this was a time when he wasn't mobbed, he wasn't as busy as he later became. I used to go home to his house after Shabbos for Havdalah. He used to invite us to his home for Havdalah, and that was a very rare and unique opportunity. It was also actually in Mir that I first became particularly interested in philosophy, which remains an abiding love of mine. I'd always been drawn to what we call machshava, which is perhaps a more sort of light Kabbalistic view of the world, and had engaged somewhat with that world. But when I was in Mir, in an interesting development, I got an eye infection. You may say, what has an eye infection got to do with philosophy? And the story was that I was unable to learn 3 Sidorim a day. The yeshiva schedule is very intense, and I was unable to look at little texts for 3 learning sessions a day due to this eye infection. And I looked around for something else to do. And in the Or Sameach yeshiva, not too far from me, was Rabbi Dr. David Gottlieb, who many of you will know, who has an interest in philosophy. And I used to go and listen to him speaking. And that drew me into the world of the Moreh Nevuchim, the world of the Guide to the Perplexed, the great philosophers from Aristotle and Plato and Socrates through to Thomas Nagel and other more contemporary philosophers. And that actually opened up a whole area of my life through the coincidence of an eye infection. So that's in terms of my time that's spent in Mir. So I will get back to your question, but maybe I'll use the third piece of music as a chance to speak about Ramesh Shmuel and here just speak more about the intervening years before that stage of my life.
Thank you very much. I think we've probably reached a suitable stage for your second piece of music, Rabbi Zobin.
So this is a piece of music, V'niskav Hashem Levado. It's composed by Karlebach. I actually still walk the streets of Yerushalayim when I was in yeshiva. One could still hear him giving a little impromptu concerts on occasion on street corners. One would see a crowd of people gathered, and he would be strumming away on his guitar. I chose this piece because to me it's got very visceral emotion and spirituality to it, and in my mind it's connected with an opening up of a world of spirituality that happened to me in Israel. This particular piece actually was first played to me by my dear friend Rabbi David Tugendhaft, who's now the Rav in our neighbouring, our sister community just down the street on Brent Street, and this is a song that to me conveys very deep spirituality. The words of the song are pasuk and another pasuk connected by a medrash. It talks about Yaakov remaining alone at night, struggling with the angel, and it speaks about God being alone. And there's something about aloneness and a spiritual journey that we need to take alone, and sometimes that deep, dark struggle in the night, and yet what a wonderful sense of unity can emerge from it. That to me is what this song is about.
Thank you.
Shame.
Thank you very much. So, Rabbi Zobin, you married your wife Aviva how many years ago?
Oh, goodness.
Sorry,
This is not fair, and I said no hard.
I'll move on. I'll move on.
21 years ago. I'm
21
joking.
years ago. Apologies.
I'm joking. My wife is sitting here in the room with me.
And I'm fascinated by the fact when you were inducted as our Rav, Jonathan Marriott pointed out that you sat as a child next to your father-in-law, which I know you say you like quick davening. That's a testament to your good conduct, because if I would have sat next to my father-in-law as a child, I wouldn't have got near. But how did you and Aviva get together? Because I think your families must obviously have known each other quite well.
Yeah, so I grew up in shul sitting next to my father, who I knew was my father, and my future father-in-law, who I didn't know was going to be my father-in-law at that time. I am a very close friend to one of my wife's brothers. We were very friendly for many, many years, and the families were very closely connected. My mother and my mother-in-law both worked together in Menorah Primary School, where my mother teaches. So there was a long and extended family connection. I used to go and visit my future grandfather-in-law, who was a very old man at the time and had passed away by the time we got married. But we used to go and visit him, and he used to give us some very nice marzipans, I remember. So we had a very long-term family connection. The Yekish half of my family was connected to the Yekish half of my wife's family for many centuries, and I remember my wife still from primary school, though she unfortunately does not remember me. From that far back, but this was a suggestion. It was a shidduch in the sense that it was a suggestion, but the families there was very close and many years of close connection there that lay behind this particular connection.
It must have been a dream to draw up the wedding list with all the mutual friends. Rabbi Zalman, so you were in Israel for a number of years, and I think you had your number of years of your married life with your wife Aviva there, and probably a number of your children were born there. How difficult was it for you to leave Israel, to return here? And I think I'm running out of time, so I'm going to combine two questions in one and ask you to briefly answer it. I've got two questions. One, how difficult was it? And two, you returned here, as far as I know, to teach in Emmanuel and then went up the ranks. And in 2014, had a change of direction, although many would say, including you and probably your predecessor, that teaching and rabbinate is one and the same. And I can certainly attest to that, but you had a change of direction. What, if you can say something about what prompted that?
Okay, so this gives me a chance to speak about the question that you asked before. To what degree do I live with the image of my my great rabbis in front of me? The two teachers of Torah who had the most influence on me were Moshe Shmuel of Be'er Yaakov and Rabbi Yitzchak Soloveitchik. Both are briskers, and briskers associated in the public mind with this Soloveitchikian, very analytical method of learning, and it is that. And for me, that was absolutely up my street. I loved it, and it spoke to my soul. But they were also and are also absolutely paradigms of Torah's Chesed. I spoke about the waves of love that come really out of both of my rebbes, both of my teachers. And for my wife and myself, being able to take what we had the privilege of learning and share it was a no-brainer. It was absolutely the right thing and the thing that we wanted to do. We had made Aliyah. We thought our life was in Israel. Through a series of events, which I don't have time to talk about now, we had ended up involved in various projects which had drawn us more and more to Chutz La'aretz. We had spent some months back in England on particular projects. I was traveling more backwards and forwards. And there came a point where it just made sense. We realized that the things we could do and the things that we could give were going to be here back in England. And in a series of very swift decisions, we moved back. So in one sense, it was difficult. And I always joke if I came home one day from shul and said to my wife, you know, let's go back to Israel. She would say, great, I'll go upstairs and pack the suitcases. But on the other hand, it was something that mattered to us both and something that we wanted to do. We wanted to share that Torah. And as you say, for me, teaching and the rabbinate really is the same, in many ways, the same path, the same career. In 2010, I'd been for about half a year as acting rabbi in Dunstan Road when Rabbi Belowski was on a sabbatical, and that also whet our appetite to some degree for communal rabbinic teaching rather than just school teaching. So I feel lucky that I'm able to balance the two loves of my life and the two areas that I enjoy, rabbinate and teaching, together in the current position.
Thank you very much, Rob. As though we are nearing end of time, so can I ask you your third record and the reasons for it?
Yeah, so the third record is something that I jumped at the opportunity of sharing, and that this evening gave me the chance to share. It's my Rebbe, Moshe Shmuel Shapiro, was not just a great Rosh Hashiva, he was also a composer of music. He was a very musical man. And not only did he compose music, but he also transmitted music that was and is in danger of being lost, the music of East Europe. And this particular tune is one composed by someone called Rabbi Yonah Minsker. He was an Iloi, a child prodigy, who learnt in yeshiva with Moshe Shmuel and was brutally murdered by Lithuanian partisans in a pogrom in 1941. And this is an incredible tune that he composed, a remarkably beautiful tune, and one that's in danger of being lost. It's not really known outside the world of the students of Be'er Yaakov. When this evening was mooted and the idea of speaking and doing Desert Islands Discs came up, I wanted to share this song, and to my amazement, I found that it doesn't exist anywhere. It has never been recorded before. It does not exist online. There simply is no recording, because Moshe Shmuel used to sing it on Shabbos. It comes from the words of one of the Zemiras. And in honor of this event, I actually stirred me to arrange for it to be put together. I mentioned my brother-in-law, who's a dear friend, Michael, my wife's brother, and he has a son who is very musical. And I sang the song to them and sent a recording of it. I'm no great singer, but I managed to sing it correctly. He then composed music to it and arranged for a chazan to sing it. And therefore, what we are about to hear is on the Ner YouTube channel. It's a piece of music that doesn't exist anywhere else, anywhere in the world. It's a beautiful piece of music, and it's one that just can't be lost. And I dedicate this song in the memory of my Rosh Hashiva's Chavrusa, who died in 1941, Rabbi Yonah Minsker. And the words of the song are taken from the Zemer on Shabbos morning, Baruch Hashem Yom Yom. It comes from one of the verses. And the words are Yotzavet Sor Chasto Kilos of Lakabit, that Hashem, the rock, should command his kindness to gather in his congregation from all four directions, gather in his flock, and to cause them to rest on the lofty mount, Yerushalayim, Zion. And then it carries on, returning with us, the outcasts gathering in. And then it refers to the Midrashic theme. It does not say he will bring back, that God will bring us back, but it says he will come back, that Hashem will return with us. That when we find ourselves in a difficult situation, when we find ourselves going through hard times, we should know that Hashem is with us. And therefore, when we are in Golus, he is there with us, and therefore he comes back with us from Golus, from the exile, which we hope will happen. And these were the songs perhaps prophetically composed by Rabbi Yonah Minsker, who went through, in the words of your father's book, a long night in a most painful way. And he composed this very, very beautiful song. And I really feel grateful that I have the opportunity to share it with everyone here today.
Thank you.
Amen.
beautiful, beautiful piece. Thank you for bringing that to the Oilam's attention, I hope to wider attention. It was a beautiful piece. Rabbi Zobin, I've got to wrap it up, unfortunately. I could go on and ask you many more questions you won't be surprised to hear. So let me just combine a few, and if I could trouble you for very brief answers. On a desert island, you're marooned on your own. So are you handy? Would you be able to build a shelter? Or would you be like me, somewhat lost?
So the answer is, if this was a desert island with a light bulb and a light bulb socket, with great difficulty, I might be able to attach the two. Beyond that, I would be absolutely helpless. So please do not maroon me.
We won't be marooned. And you can bring a book, but we're going to change it slightly and say, what sefer would you bring to a desert island and what luxury would you bring?
The sefer would probably be the Rambam's Moreh Nevuchim. To me, it's been his guide to the perplexed. It's been a source of spiritual inspiration to me. I learn it constantly and continue. It's for me my route to connection to Yiddishkeit. And the luxury, I guess, would have to be a box of tissues. I don't think I can manage without one. So that would probably be my luxury.
And my very final question to you, because I'm intrigued by it. In a desert island, we know from listening to you that you'd probably be learning philosophy and economics on a secular way. If you had to learn any secular subject, you'd be learning Rambam. What do you do to relax? If you had to occasionally relax, what do you actually do?
I love two things. I love reading and learning, and I love walks and nature and countryside. So those two. So I'd have plenty of walking to do on the desert island, perhaps a little too much.
Rabbi Zobin, thank you very much for giving me the privilege of interviewing you. I could have gone on for a lot longer, and I apologize because I think I have slightly overrun our time with you. But it's, from my point of view, been well worth it. Thank you very, very much indeed.
Thank you, Alan. And I'll take this overrunning of the time as your permission for me to overrun my drosha slots in future also.
Always.
I would say that I have posted on the chats group the link to the song. Please have a look at it. It has their pictures of Moshe Shmuel, my Rebbe, and of his lost chavrusa, Rabbi Yonah Minsker. So please, I'd ask everyone to take a chance, follow the link and listen to this song. And thank you very much to Veronique, and to you for organising this, and to you, Alan. Sharon Radler, I should mention, for organising this also, and to you, Alan, for interviewing me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. My next host is Mrs. Viv Levy. Viv is originally from Sheffield. She is a very well-known and loved special educational needs coordinator and has worked in several of our schools. She is the wife of Moshe Levy, mother of 4 children, and devoted grandmother to many grandchildren. She's going to cast away Rosie Krasinski, who she will introduce. Viv, it's over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Oh, brilliant. Well, we really have a hard act to follow. I have a very hard act in following you anyway, Alan. You did that absolutely beautifully. But I think Rosie's going to stand up pretty well here. My castaway today is Rosie Krasinski. Rosie and I have been friends since our little ones started GAN together in the heady early days of the IJDS. And I knew as soon as I met her, it was my lucky day. Rosie's warm, she has a fantastically outgoing personality, she has a unique and honest take on life. And I clearly remember one of my first visits to her house. You go in at the side at the Grudzinski home, you don't go in through the main entrance.
Shabbos door.
Facing the Shabbos door, that's right. You come in through the side, up through the step and into the kitchen, and there emblazoned on the kitchen cabinets, on a big red tea towel, it said, hang on, choose your rut carefully. You may be in it for some time. And I thought, well, there's a lot of laughter in this home, and I've often thought about that tea towel, and I'm still laughing. Although, however, it may be true for others, Rosie is probably the most rut-defying person I have ever met. And I know that we're in for some fascinating insights into, and I'm plagiarizing Edith Piaf here, La vie en Rosie. Sorry, Rosie. So, Rosie, you were one of 3 daughters born to Hilda and Albert Rosenberg, and your childhood years were spent in Edgware, Stamford Hill, and the suburbs. So pretty much covered everywhere. You moved to Hendon thereafter. I know that your parents were both...
Finchley.
Oh, sorry, and then Hendon.
Finchley.
Oh, sorry, you're still in... I do beg your pardon. My geography was never much of a strong point. I know that your parents were both enormously strong influences on you as you grew up, and that your love of music began with them. Your first choice is what your mother called one of the silly songs, and I wonder if you'd like to tell us something about what led you to choose this song.
Ridiculously difficult act to follow. You were wonderful, Rabbi Zobin. My mother seemed to be, she was built in layers. She seemed to be funny and had an amazing sense of humour, and her silly songs, as my gorgeous sister will attest, were what we all did. I'm sure anybody of our age will remember going on long car journeys before motorways happened, and every 30 seconds there was another roundabout and another roundabout, and we used to sing on the way, and we used to sing what she called the silly songs. So they would be things like when mother was bathing the baby, or Mersey Dotes and Dozy Dotes, and we used to sing with great gusto. We were 3 daughters, and we used to have the best of the time. That was really wonderful. And on that level, she had this wonderful sense of humour. She was also extremely openly, ostensibly naive. Once when driving through Israel in its early days, I think in the 50s, I think 56 they went, and they were driving along, there was a building on the right hand side, and she said, "What's that building over there?" And the person in the car with her said, "Oh, that's a prison." And my mother, in all honesty, turned around and said, "Oh, what? What do you need a prison for in a Jewish country?" And she really felt it, and she really meant it. So on the one hand, she was naive and funny and all of those things. You just said any word to her and it sparked off a song. On the other hand, she'd had a life of some tragedy. She lost her father and 3 siblings in their 20s. You can't take it. Her father and 3 siblings in her 20s, which was, quite tragic for anybody within a space of 10 years. And she was quite a strong person. She was quite a tachlistic person. One of the things that she did was that when she saw the war was coming, she decided she couldn't get called up from munitions factory. That wasn't what she wanted to do at all. And so she volunteered to go into the ATS, and she went into the British Army as an ATS, and she became a corporal. She flourished there. My father also was in the army, so I'm an army English girl, not the European. So there was a strong side to her, as well as her otherwise, but she had a clear idea of who she was, where she was going, and who we were to be. So my philosophy, which obviously came from her, because where else do we get our philosophies from, were, if you don't give your children their Yiddishkeit with love, forget it. If you don't teach them that it smells nice and it feels nice, and that it's fun and happy and joyous, don't expect them to follow you. Don't give them a list of rules. Say, this is great. This is something to enjoy for the rest of your life. And I think she gave that to us. And I think I tried to pass that on to my children, our children. And I hope that we succeeded, because for me, that spirit, one of my daughters was once very not well. And I said to her, "Are you scared?" And she said, "No, Mummy, I'm not scared." And I said, "You're allowed to be scared. This is scary stuff. Why aren't you scared?" And she just looked at me and she said, "It's okay." She said, "HaKadosh Baruch was looking after me." And she didn't just say it. It wasn't just what she said. It's what she felt. It's what she meant. And those are the kinds of midot that passed down through my mother and through me. So although she had these wonderful, silly songs, she had the other side. She was into real music. We went to concerts. We went to the ballet each year. Rural girls. That's the way the girls do. Anyhow, so I felt that one of her silly songs would, I think it's a great song, with
Well, now we're going to hear it. Your choice of silly song for this evening is by that famous duo, Flanders and Swan, and it's called The Gas Man Cometh.
And you have to listen to the words because it's a story.
'Twas on a Monday morning, the gas man came to call. The gas tap wouldn't turn, I wasn't getting gas at all. He tore out all the skirting boards to try and find the main, and I had to call a carpenter to put them back again. Oh, it all makes work for the working man to do. 'Twas on the Tuesday morning, the carpenter came round. He hammered and he chiseled, he said,
Look what I found. Your joists are full of dry rot, but I'll put them all to rights.
and he nailed right through a cable, and out went all the lights. Makes work for the working man to do.
'Twas on a Wednesday morning, the electrician came. He called me Mr. Sanderson, which isn't quite the name. He couldn't reach the fuse box without standing on the bin,
And his foot went through a window, so I called the glazier in. Oh, it all makes work for the working man to do. 'Twas on the Thursday morning, the glazier came along with his brush and his putty and his merry glazier song. He put another pane in, it took no time at all. I had to get a painter in to come and paint the wall. Oh, it all makes work for the working man to do. 'Twas on a Friday morning, the painter made a start. With undercoats
and overcoats.
he painted every part, every nook and every cranny. But I found when he was gone, he painted over the gas tap and I couldn't turn it on. On Saturday and Sunday, they do no work at all. So 'twas on the Monday morning that the gas man came to call.
Thank you, Rossi. That's a marvellous example of post-war British creativity. And it's as good now, I'm sure, as it was when people heard it back in the day. Your second choice of music is embedded in your love of Jewish liturgical music, as well as your wonderful childhood memories. You said that you grew up surrounded by Jewish music and that your father was born with a song on his lips, which is such a lovely way to describe him. He was such a wonderful man. Would you like to tell us a little about your magical introduction to music from such an early age?
I would love to, because it's not about me, it's about my grandfather to start with. My grandfather was called Yedidia Rosenberg, and when he was born in the Shtetl, a little place called Stabin in Poland. And when he was 19, Lord only knows why, he was invited to become the chazan of the community in Woolwich, Southeast 18. There were so few Jews there, and that they afforded to have a chazan is just beyond my understanding. But he came over when he was 19 to be the chazan there, and he stayed there for 55 years, and he built a community there, which was great and wonderful. We used to go there every year when we were kids. So my father used to go to help his father to daven for the Yomim Noroim. My grandfather would do Kol Nidre and Musaf and Ne'ilah, and my dad would do Shachris and Mincha. That was his job. And for as long as I could remember, in fact, until I was 16, every single year we used to go there. That's what we did. We used to pack up our everythings and off we went to Southeast 18. One good thing about that was we could use the River Thames for Tashlech. It's quite good. Anyhow, he had not only did he have a lovely voice, and he was a great raconteur, but he had a personality which enveloped these non-from people into his world. So apart from when he talked to him, he used to lean over the banister and he used to say, "My friends," and each one felt personally connected to him. More importantly, on Yom Kippur, when it came to the beginning of Musaf, and he had to sing Hineni, there'd been a break. There's always a break. We didn't go out of shul. It was like 10 minutes or quarter of an hour where people could talk to each other. It was an old church, It still had the pews and everything in it. The iconography obviously was gone, but it was an old church with wooden pews. And the women sat behind the men, no mechitza in those days, but the women sat at the back and the men sat further forward. And it would come time for Hineni, and he wouldn't clap on the bimmer and say, come on, time for Musaf. None of it. He would come in through the doors right at the back of the church, and he would quietly slip in with his white clothes, his white canonicals, with his, you know, square hat like they had, with his tallis over his head. And he used to very, very quietly start walking down the aisle. Hineni, morning. And as he passed each row, they would nudge each other and say, he's here, he's here. By the time he got to the front, there wasn't a sound, there wasn't a murmur. And this great tefillah, which begged HaKadosh Baruch Hu to accept his tefillot on behalf of this community, although he was unworthy, which he wasn't, was quite the most magical thing. And when I finally, when I was 60, went to an ordinary shul for Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, I was really disappointed in the relationship between the Chazan and the community, because he had, you know, made himself one of them. He had led them. He'd done wonderful things to them. So that was the very beginning of it all. And then there was my dad. Anybody who knew him would know that he was great. He was a very naughty boy. He lived to be 98 and a half, and he was the lovable rogue, but he was born with music. He would come down in the morning and you would hear him going, I'm going to have eggs for breakfast. And he'd go back up to bed at night. It's time to go to bed. He just sang all the time. Down to we were singing to him when he died at his stone setting. We all sang his favourite Zmira. Our house was open to the world. My parents invited everybody you can possibly think of. They were like, I don't know, they just attracted all kinds of, when the Bernsteins first came to live in the suburb, they had to be there. When the Cohens, they had to be there. When people were widowed, when people were, they were always there. And my sisters and I, well, me and one sister, our escape from these interminable people who were lovely, but they were all old. I mean, we were kids who wanted that, was we used to take a siddur. It was a black old kol bow. And we used to sing all the Zemiras from the beginning to the end, one after the other, after the other, after the other. It was just music all the way. And that was just too wonderful. I have a particular tefillah, which means a lot to me. Years and years ago, when our daughters used to come to shul, and of course they all sat with me and not with Johnny, which was heartbreaking. Used to get to shul and they all came with me and he went off on his own. That's what happens when you only have girls. I used to have them sitting with me, and I remember on Yom Kippur, when it came to Ochila, I would say to them, read the words, read the English, read the words, see what you're saying, understand what's going on here, read the words. And I've been in love with that tefillah, I don't know, from my Woolwich days and then through our days and the kids' days, and it's quite wonderful. And so, Viv?
So we're going to hear Yishai Rebo's rendition of Ochila Lakel.
No. Wrong music. Wrong music. That doesn't sound like Yishai Rebo.
Okay, give me a second. It must be your third song then. Hold on.
I'll give you,
Yeah,
it is
sure
my third
it
song. You have to wait for that one.
All right. It's going to be complicated now. All right, let's try this.
Proceed.
Is that right?
אכל פניו
שאלה ממנו מענה לשון אשר בי כלם השיר ההוא זו אביע רננות בעד מפעליו אשר בי כלם השיר ההוא זו אביע רננות בעד מפעליו לאדם מר חלב ומאשר וימענה לשון השם שפתי תפתח ופי יגיד תהילתך.
Messages coming through.
The inimitable and inspirational voice of Ishai Rebo. Very beautiful. Rosie, you were a reluctant student of music, and by your own admission, your early performance was what you termed mediocre. What happened to change all that?
Oh, so many things. We all learned an instrument in those days. Perhaps we didn't have iPads and computer games. I don't know. Everybody learned an instrument, and we learned the piano. My older sister wasn't too great at it. She was okay, and I came along, and I just couldn't be bothered. You know, every family has a naughty one, a bad one. I was the bad one. I was always naughty. I was always untidy. I never towed the line. You know, everybody knew it. That was okay. They were allowed to be like that. I grew out of it. It's okay. And I never practiced, and I never did anything. You progress a little bit. You know, I used to cheat. I used to say to the teacher, she used to say, okay, here's your new piece, you know, sit down and see how we get on. And I used to say, could you just play it for me first so I know what it sounds like? And in that way, I knew what it was supposed to sound like. And I could, you know, wing it by ear a bit and, you know, not really read the notes. And I was no great pianist, but I got on to grade 2, grade 3, was doing grade 4. It starts to get quite serious round about there. And I thought, oh, you know, and they used to lock me up in the music room in school. It was up a little back staircase. And I thought, oh, I can't be bothered with all this. And one day my mum said to me, listen up, you. If you don't get a distinction in this exam, no more lessons. And I just suddenly realised how important it was to me to carry on with what I was doing, and how there was no way I was going to stop doing that now. So that was why I carried on, and I did carry on. There was music going on everywhere by then. One Sunday afternoon, I took myself off from my room supposedly to do my homework, which again I was extraordinarily lazy about, and I couldn't be bothered. And somebody had given me a record. It was the first record that I owned. It was mine. I had a record, and I played it, and I think it's stayed with me all my life. I mean, it's quite a hackneyed piece of music, and it's not what I'm going to play here. It's just, it was the 1812. It was Tchaikovsky in 1812, and I just suddenly realised this is who I was. This is where I wanted to be. This music wasn't just something you listened to. It was something that was integral to my personality and my life, and I just had to keep on doing that. So there was the mixture of the classical music and other music, coming from a family with chazanut. I don't know if anybody around here came from Stamford Hill, but in Stamford Hill, on the second night of Pesach, when they started Sfirat HaOmer, you couldn't get into the shul. Not men, not women, not children. We used to have to sit on the stairs because it was packed to a man, and it was huge, Egerton Road. The music with the choir and the challah was out of this world. You could hear a pin drop. It was just like the event of the year. So music like all that chazanot, we had records before other people did of chazanot. That was completely in my life. On a Shabbos, we had one of the old-fashioned time switches, which were not sophisticated like today's, and you could only have it coming on once and off once. So it used to come on for lunch on Shabbos morning, and it used to go off after lunch on Shabbos, and that was it. No more lights today. So the truth is, we used to play or do whatever it was we were doing, and as it got darker and darker, we used to sing. And we used to sit and sing, and then we sang some more, and then we sang some more, and then we sang some more, and then we sang some more. We used to start a song with the last letter of the first song, or we used to go down the letters of the alphabet. We just used to sit and sing. Shabbos would go out, we wouldn't even notice. And those memories, that kind of musical warmth, doesn't go away. It doesn't go out through your boots, as they say. It's something that goes on forever. So I continue to study the piano, never terribly well, but not terribly badly. Mediocre sounds about right. And I decided I told you I was naughty, so I didn't really want to go to university. It was a status symbol in those days. It was so important you went to university. I even know somebody who didn't have a degree who in the Chronicle, when she got engaged, put herself down as her first name and her second name, SSC, because she needed to have a degree, otherwise you were nobody. And what did SSC stand for? Her father was a delicatessen, and it stood for smoked salmon cutter. She just had to have a degree. She had to have a degree. Well, I was very bolshy, and there was no way I was going to do a degree. So I arranged for my A-levels to clash. Naughty, really. I made sure that two of them clashed, and I couldn't do the third one because it clashed with one of the others. So instead of that, I did two what do we used to call them? O-levels. I did 2 O-levels from scratch. I did Russian and Greek literature in translation. What a load of tosh that was. But I didn't have to do my third A-level. But one of my A-levels was music. I'd definitely gone down that route by then. And it was the joy of my life. I used to come out of school, I didn't want to do my homework, my music homework. I would do it on the bus. I was so excited to get going and do it. So I did music for A-level. And herein lies my third piece of music. I was the librarian at Hasmonean for 30 years. It was something that I fell into because there was no library when my older girls went there. It had been closed by the council for vandalism. They found a sandwich inside a book, and they closed the library. So I just went in to tidy things up, and 30 years later I was still there. One of the things I used to do was that every day I used to play a piece of music on a CD, and I would write up on a thing what the piece of music today was. So obviously the one that I used first was something very, very dear to my heart, and it's the middle movement of my A-level set work, one of our A-level set works, and it's a Mozart piano concerto. It's K488, and it's absolutely fabulous. But the middle movement is out of this world, the slow movement, and it's one of only 2 things that Mozart wrote in F sharp minor. It was an unusual key for him, and I hope you will agree with me when we do hear it now. Thank you, Simon, that it is very beautiful. Off you go. It's too long.
What a stunning piece of music to finish your choices with. I'm sure it's going to stay with us all. Rosie, this brings to a close your musically inspired, the musically inspired tour of your life, and it must be obvious to everyone that whatever you do next, it's going to be full of love and family and beautiful music. We're running out of time apparently, but just quickly, I think it's well known that you were a school librarian, and I wanted to ask, out of all the many, many, many books that you've known and loved, is there one you could choose to take with you on your desert island?
Well, when you asked me first what luxury in book I would take, I definitely said, can I take Johnny as my luxury? Because I can't function without him. And actually, he can be my book as well. But given that I couldn't do that, I love children's books. They are direct. They don't beat about the bush. They say what they mean what they say. They're punchy. And one of my favourites is a book called A Monster Calls by somebody called Patrick Ness. It's a story of uncertainty of childhood, of love, of tragedy. There's a touch of fantasy. It's got a difficult end, but it's satisfying. It's just an amazing book, not for children under 14, 13, 14. It's about a death. It's about a child whose mother is dying and dies. So that would be my book. It offers everything that I need, and it had to be a children's book.
And your luxury?
Well, given that I can't take Johnny, I think I'm going to be a bit cheeky. I'm going to have the first ever, not yet invented, solar-powered iPad, because my iPad and I are joined at the hip, I have to admit. I would have everything on there. I would have the pictures of my wonderful grandchildren and my amazing daughters. I would have pictures of my parents. I would have all the music I wanted. I would have had all the books that I don't even need to be on the internet. I could just store all those wonderful things there to use at my leisure. And I think that's what I would take as a luxury.
It sounds like a fabulous choice, typically creative. Rosie, it's been wonderful talking to you, as it always is. And thank you so much for being my desert island.
Reciprocated. Thank you very much, Viv. Thank you.
Thank you, Viv and Rosie. Our next interviewer, who's Dr. Ayala Mora Prager, who's going to cast away John Danneman. Ayala Mora Prager
That's your way.
from UCL, specializes in comparative genocide studies and has also worked in communication and advocacy. She's married to Avi with 2 young sons. Ayala, over to you.
Thanks, Talan. Rosie and Viv, you were talking about a hard act to follow. You've given us one of our own. So I hope it will be just as entertaining and enlightening and fun as that was. So that was really enjoyable to listen to. Tonight, I am casting away John. John, you are the subject of tonight's castaway. I first met John at Shaw, so I think it's particularly fitting that we are having this conversation on this platform with all of you. John is genuinely someone who has one of the most fascinating life stories that I've ever had. So international, so wide-ranging, so genuinely interesting in all of its aspects. And I think you're all in for a treat tonight when you hear a little bit about his life, his journey, where he first began his journey, where he is now. So John, let's start. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Probably the most social contact anyone's had in the lockdown period.
Well, thank you very much for having me on. Very honored to be interviewed by. It's been very good. What I've taken away from this period is a certain serenity. So I'm lucky to be in relatively fortunate circumstances, both work-wise. I can focus on my PhD research, which we might talk about a bit later. For me, it's been a time of serenity.
Okay, well, among the chaos, that's quite something to have achieved. So well done, you. Okay, well, John, let's start at the beginning. So why don't you start by telling us a little bit about your childhood, where you grew up, and a little bit about the dynamics of that.
Sure. I just briefly want to say thank you very much for having me on and for everything that went into this, and for the slight risk of for including me in this. So I was born and raised in Germany in a medium-sized town called Mönchengladbach on the Dutch border. It's basically to the left of the banks of the Rhine. And I was born into a family from my mother's side. I descend from the American Midwest. My mother was raised in Illinois, and my father was a product of the German Haskalah. My grandfather on my father's side was a German army officer in World War I. And he apparently entered as a reservist because military service officer duty was not open to Jews at the beginning of the war. So he entered the artillery as a reserve officer, and he then went on to join the nascent aviation corps of the German army on the Western Front, which was a small troop of some fairly distinguished flying aces, from what I understand. I'm still looking into that part. So on my father's side, I'm actually the first generation after the Holocaust. My father went into exile in Brazil, where he spent about 25 years altogether. He became a classical violinist. He also played the viola, and he went all around the world in pursuit of that profession. And then settled with my mother in Germany, where I was born in the late 80s in West Germany. There's another very important part of my story, which is that my parents were both victims of one of the Black September hijackings. It was the flight that was ultimately grounded in London. So the immediate response, the immediate outcome of that was that my parents had a cup of tea with Scotland Yard, as they like to say. But I like to say that my father survived anti-Semitism twice. And so I was a very dear son to them, very much awaited, and they raised me in that spirit. And so I grew up in a family that was not particularly observant, but it was always clear that we were a Jewish house. And I grew up around a lot of classical music, and I guess we'll get to that in a moment.
Yes, so I mean, now that you've led us very nicely into that, John, thank you. Can you tell us a little bit about what your first song choice is and what the significance of this piece of music is to you?
Yes, my first song choice is a piece by Paganini, the Capricci number 24. The significance of that is basically that this is the piece that I associate most closely with my father, because I was born when he was about to go into retirement, but he still kept teaching. And this was one of the pieces that he rehearsed most. So my understanding is that most composers have a fairly wide variety, but Paganini is known to have maybe not focused exclusively, but much of his work on composing music for the violin and the viola. And this is the one that I remember my father practicing sometimes several times a week.
Okay, so John, I could see even when you're listening to that, how much it kind of brings back to you. That was wonderful. Thank you for choosing that for us. I want to kind of, steer the conversation slightly
Sure.
to kind of the next phase, because John, your life has had many phases and stages, each one more complex and fascinating than the next. And in conversations we've had in the past, you've often said how, despite the fact that your childhood was a very stable, loving time in your life, you said that there was always something that, was kind of, niggling at you, and you never quite felt that you were 100% at home for whatever reason, which I'm sure you'll talk to us about. So I wonder if you wouldn't mind sharing that aspect of your journey following your childhood and what that led to going forward.
Sure. Well, where do I begin? It would probably be my first retort. But it's true. So you've mentioned that I've been in various places, which I can elaborate on in a moment. But yes, I always felt that there was something missing. So I started out actually attending an English school on a military base in Germany, which was part of the British Army of the Rhine. And so I had a very idyllic primary school time there. And then my parents transferred me to a German secondary school in the town that I grew up in. And so I felt very much not necessarily a part of that. And in a way, I missed the idyllic community that I had at my primary school, but for various reasons, it was not possible for me to stay there and do my GCSEs there, for example. So I had a difficult time in secondary school, and my parents were very supportive. My teachers were very supportive. I attended a small shul in the area, and I had cheder there. But yes, all in all, there was always something missing, and so I wanted to continue my British education, and I came to study here at university. And part of my family history, as I just alluded to, was that there was very much a struggle for my identity. There was trauma especially from my father's side, and I had to come to terms with that. One poignant detail I forgot to mention is that my mother apparently on that flight sat right next to Leila Khaled, who was obviously an icon of the Palestinian terrorist movement back in the day. So there was a lot of trauma, there was a lot of searching, because I never managed to quite find my role. And I realized that in order to find what I was looking for, I had to go into the past. So I attended university here, and then I was lucky to get into contact to learn about the March of the Living. And I went to the March of the Living in 2012, where I was lucky to meet our shul's very own Jonathan Ross, who actually exemplified what Jewish practice was. He was one of the more observant people that I got to know on that trip. And I realized, for example, that by that time my father had passed on when I was 16. And I realized that I wouldn't be able to honor my ancestors. I wouldn't be able to say Kaddish. And so one of the consequences I drew from that trip is to immerse myself more into Judaism, because when you grow up, at least in my experience on the continent, when you grow up in a Jewish community on the continent, then they can give you cheder, they can give you regular services, but that immersive aspect is missing. And I saw what a Jewish education could do. And also in my upbringing, there was never much open anti-Semitism, but I was always asked about Israel. I was always pigeonholed, and I never knew how to fit that pigeonhole. So I decided I need to see Judaism in action, so to say, in a vibrant, dynamic setting. So I decided to spend a year in Israel, where I basically also started seeking out what Judaism was like in practice. And it was, I spent half a year on Kibbutz Eliyahu, half a year in Yerushalayim, And it was a boon for me, because now I knew this thing called Judaism could function. Because when you grow up in a relatively marginal place in the Jewish world, then the idea that Judaism is stale and it's outdated and that it's something to kind of be cast off and potentially be embarrassed about is something that's not too far. It's not something that I actively sought to believe, but I wasn't really presented with much of an alternative, despite the best efforts of everyone around me. So Israel was really a boon for me in that respect.
Well, yes, and I think Israel is going to become important in our conversation in a few minutes when we lead up to our third song. But I think this sense of, uncertainty leading up to this feeling of, being found, I think that's very much exemplified in your second track.
Yes.
So would you like to introduce that for us?
Sure. The second track is a piece by Beethoven, and it stands exemplary as an example for many, many other. It's from a miniseries called Band of Brothers, which was aired in the 2000s. It was a very good one. And the key element is that after primary school and being surrounded by what I felt were liberators, I grew up in that sense that the British Army was there to liberate Germany. I had that sense especially from my father. And there were still missions going on into the Balkans at the time when I attended. So many of my fellow pupils at that school were being moved around along with their parents. But this particular piece is from a scene in Band of Brothers, which traces a US paratrooper unit from preparing for the landings in Normandy up to the liberation of Germany. And there's an episode in which they liberate a camp close to a Bavarian town called Landsberg. And they then, after liberating that camp and being inundated with how to take care of them, they decide to confront the townspeople with that situation. And as they roll into the completely destroyed town, there's a small chamber ensemble playing this particular piece by Beethoven. And it's a sad piece. It's mostly a sad piece. And to me, it stands for that particular situation, also what it meant to me. And of course, I ended up studying military history and matters of war and peace, partially because of my background. And so it also stands for the immersion that I had in the confrontation with World War II and how this had a personal meaning to me, even 40 years, 50 years after the war. So that's the short version.
Thank you. I think anyone who's seen Band of Brothers can picture that scene just by listening to that track alone. Very evocative. One of the most, I think, remarkable testaments to your resilience and, you know, your commitment to finding yourself and your identity comes from the fact that you underwent a conversion to Judaism after discovering that your mother wasn't actually Jewish. And I think, you know, we spoke a lot through the process and after the process, and I leading up to your third song, which is kind of about homecoming. I wondered if maybe you would care to share a little bit about that process and talk about how that came to be and how that has kind of brought you to where you are.
Certainly. So this is a very interesting part, because I grew up thinking that I was Jewish. Certainly in my family, my father's story very much dominated my upbringing. And so, you know, I was very much a middle of the road traditional Jew. Well, actually, that's an overstatement. I was a proud secular Jewish cosmopolitan, and so I decided, you know, I thought religion was not very important.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I think something has gone a little wrong with your sound. Do you want to try and mute and then unmute?
Okay, let's see. Can you hear me?
Still a little unclear.
Okay, maybe I can. Does it not work?
No, John, it's really bad.
Okay.
Unplug your headset maybe and try.
Yeah.
No, I think it's your computer, John.
No.
John, do you might just worth if you disconnect and rejoin your audio.
Try again.
You disconnect and rejoin, maybe.
I did. Wait.
John, do you want me to call you on the phone and try and have you coming out of my phone speaker?
I'll try and reconnect. Just a moment.
So whilst we're waiting for John to rejoin, Avi and I met John when he was going through the conversion process, and we both learned a lot about what that process entailed, and I think that was valuable for us, and to learn about, you know, what are the difficulties that the process brings up, how can we best be supportive of those going through the process. And I think that going forward, having this conversation, I think it's an important platform to use to ask that question again of what we can do to be supportive for those going through the process. And that is something that I think John is in the best place to teach us. So when he is back, which I think he might be. John, you back?
Does this work?
Yes, there you are.
Fantastic.
Okay, welcome back. So let's pick up where we left off.
Yes. So I grew up thinking I was Jewish. I was certainly exploring my father's roots and my family's roots. I've subsequently basically managed to establish that 3 generations ago, my father's family was from Latvia. But yes, so I was at university thinking I was Jewish. Actually, I was on a master's degree I was doing in Singapore. And I started going to shul. This was shortly after the March of the Living. And I was thinking of moving my membership around. I was thinking of where to go, where to maybe, you know, where to take the journey. And basically, because of that, I was asking my mother for documents. And my mother then volunteered that there was no ketubah. That I could use to prove my Jewish identity. So the first thing I did was that I went to Rabbi Abergel in Singapore, who's still the rabbi there, And I thought I had bargaining power because I had had a bar mitzvah in shul. They had done the ceremony for me. I'd actually voluntarily undergone circumcision. I had I had been on the march of living. I was ready to go. I was ready to cast off my rebellious past. And God intervened and said, well, there's a bit more of an effort to do. So Rabbi Abergel, in the kindest possible way, told me if I wanted to continue the journey, I would need to convert. And that reinforced my desire to spend some time in Israel, which I did. And in Israel, this is where I strongly feel that God shows himself in our everyday lives. In Israel, I was asking around about how to best go about conversion. I was very sure of this. And I was actually advised by someone with lots of experience in the conversion system, the head of a conversion program at a yeshiva, that I should not convert in Israel. And he asked me about where my plans are. And I said, well, I do want to do a PhD, establish my career in an English-speaking environment. He said, okay, go to London. And that's what I did, essentially. So, over the course of the conversion, just to introduce that, maybe also from a spiritual point of view, I discovered that the things that were so disparate about me, that I had an American mother, I had a German Jewish background that nobody shared. I grew up around lots of people who had emigrated from the Soviet Union because they were invited in by Germany, thank God, but they hadn't had. They were actually highly assimilated. They weren't necessarily a peer group within my own shul. And so this was the way, the conversion was the way for God to initiate me into the things that I really wanted to learn and really made me cherish it. Because if I had had the choice to go to a certain level, then I might have just stopped somewhere. And so this was God's way of ensuring that I would get to the level he needed me at. And this was the way to basically move from trauma and move from several disparate identities, growing up as a minority in my own shul, having an American background, British education, and various background in Eastern Europe. So these were the disparate parts. And these were all tearing on me in different directions. And so I quickly discovered that Judaism, all the things that we tend to get maligned for, that we live at the margins of society and that we kind of, we have connections all over the world in terms of communities. Those are the things that I found really attractive, because Judaism to me is a portable identity. We now have a state of Israel, and I'm very grateful for that. But the portability of it all is what helped me make sense of my own journey, because I went to the end of the world, to Singapore, to find out that I need to go back to the beginning, back to the drawing board.
Very, international as ever, John. So just in the interest of time, I want to kind of bring you to London. So I'm going to pick you up and I'm going to drop you in London. How did you first come to the Ner community?
Right. So the very first hint, the very first pointer I ever got was actually in Singapore. Somebody said, that's the shul that you need to go to. I didn't know what to do with that. I forgot about that for 3 years. Now I came here, I explored various shuls, various communities, but what I was ultimately looking for was something that we have on our website actually, which is I was looking for not a modern Orthodox shul necessarily. I don't personally believe in these labels, but unfortunately they do exist. They're facts of our everyday community life. And so I was looking for something that is modern and Orthodox, and that's exactly what we have on our website. So that's something I was looking for. I was looking for a shul where the membership was learned, but nevertheless had a wide range of interests, and also something where my Zionism and what I would abbreviate as my Jewish nationalism, Judaism being the ferment of much of non-Jewish history, even if it's just accidentally, was something that was cherished, that was affirmed. So my father was a Zionist. My father gave money. He didn't have a lot of money himself. He gave money from Brazil right in 1948 And together with that airplane hijacking, I also was looking for a Zionist shul. And so that, together with the Friday night service that I experienced, when I heard the Friday night service, I was sold.
Excellent. And I think, the conversation around your conversion and the different elements of that is a long one. And I don't think that we have time, unfortunately, to get into all of that now. But one question I do want to ask, and I think it's important that, we as a community ask this question and to make sure that we are better going forward is, in the conversion process, as you found yourself part of a new community, was there anything that you wish the community would have said, done, acknowledged?
I'm very, very grateful to the community, to both Rabbi Zobin and Rabbi Kimchi, and many, many others who were very welcoming. If there's one suggestion I would make, and this doesn't go just for converts, but for anyone who's maybe not grown up in these circles, I would ask that when the conversation comes to where somebody comes from, what brought them to the community, that the questions that are asked are open-ended ones. There's this famous game of Jewish geography. And I really appreciate that we all want a point where we can orient ourselves. But the one thing in the brevity of time that I would ask is, don't ask just about the one community in that one country, whether I happen to be from there. Don't ask to, whether I did this and that we consider typical in the Jewish community. So I could go on and on, but if I could summarize it and wrap it up very briefly, please ask open-ended questions and not questions that I'm forced to potentially ask where a yes or a no might be expected. And then I would have to kind of say, well, it doesn't quite work that way.
Yeah, so, making space for ambiguity, complexity.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think, a community can only make itself better if we ask these questions, hear the answers. Sometimes it's uncomfortable, but sometimes getting uncomfortable is necessary. So thank you, John, for sharing that, because, sometimes it's not an easy thing to talk about, but something I've always enjoyed about my conversations with you is your openness to speak about these things and kind of move us both productively forward in that respect. Okay, so in the interest of time, let's take it to your final song, which I listened to actually for the first time yesterday. Why don't you introduce that for us? Tell us a little bit about what this signifies to you, who the singers are, and why you chose it as your third track.
Certainly. Yes, music, as mentioned, was a huge part of my upbringing. And again, this song stands for many, many others. My Jewish pride came out when I realized that there's a vibrant Israeli-driven popular culture, and that there is something for the religious sector as well, so to say. Because I had been to youth camp in Germany, and I was fed the usual diet of Ner Yisrael, so songs from the founding days of the Yishuv and the early days of the State of Israel. And this was basically I discovered that there were Jewish boy bands and that they actually covered secular music in a kosher way. And that was the part that I was really missing, because I had no idea that there was a vibrant Jewish popular culture. So I'm very, very grateful to all the efforts across the Jewish world that have gone into this. And this is a song called We Are Home by Kippah Live. Kippah Live are an Israeli band. They are all descendants of Olim, I think first generation descendants. And it's really about finding their home. Obviously, they're referring to living in the land of Israel, living in the state of Israel. But to me, as mentioned, the wonderful thing about Judaism is that it is portable. Obviously, please God, may we all end up in the land of Israel at some point. But it really represents to me the fact that I've arrived. The journey hasn't ended. Maybe it's just begun. However, I feel home. I feel at ease. I feel for the first time in my life, for the last 2-3 years, I feel comfortable in my own skin. And for that, I'm very grateful. And
with that, I think we should
music
sing
is
your song.
Yeah. So for that, I'm very grateful, and the music is a big part of it.
Left it all to be with you. Distant dreams have now come true. Walk the streets of legends told. We've come home. We've come home. We've come home. And we'll never stand alone. After 2,000 years, we are home. Not a native of this land. Bring me up and take my hand. Sapphire seas and golden sand. A place called home. We've come home. We've come home to a land of our own. After 2,000 years, we are home.
Thank you, John. I know, John, you're a big fan of a cappella and singing in general. And if you ever have the pleasure of having John at your Shabbat table, as I have, you will find that out for yourself. He's got a beautiful voice and he does a mean impression of Donald Trump. So with that, John, I want to say thank you so much for being cast away on this island with us this evening and being so open and sharing your journey and your story. We all have much to learn from it. And with that, I would like to pass back to Alain, who I think is going to sum up the evening for us.
Ayala, John, thank you very much. I also want to say thank you once again to Viv and to Rosie. A special thank you to Rabbi Zobin. And once again to thank Simon Balsam, to thank your dad, Ayala. I've got his name is Jack Moore, Simon Mora. Jack Moore was a well-named patissier. I've got food in my brain. Simon Mora and Veronique Berman and Sharon Radley. Thank you very much all. I will be back in my more usual slot, Tisha B'Av afternoon, but until then, it's been a really moving and enjoyable evening, and I'm very grateful. Thank you very much and good evening.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Amazing. Do your impression of Donald Trump.